So in Yahoo, elite schools, affirmative and how Asian American students play into the part of this. And it's an article that was out of Yahoo. I believe it's in the New York Post as well. And so this is not coming from just me. No, this is some findings or some research and some things that I was talking about in terms of like, some of the big name universities that have a number or certain numbers of students that attend there. So I'm trying to actually go back to where I was. So bear with me. So I was reading here. And so I'm going to start actually right here. The New York Post, okay, is where the article was, one of the articles at least. So I'm going to read this. Okay. Because actually it started all the way up here. So this article is in the New York Post. It's by Linda Chavez, and it is titled "Asians Are the Main Victim of Elite School Affirmative Action." And so it goes in a whole history. And so I'm just gonna go back through. And so it says Asian Americans are among the most successful group in the US, but we often forget the discrimination they face in getting where they are today, as well as the challenges they still endure. So no immigrant group faced as great a barrier to entry in the US as Asians did. Chinese laborers began in the mid-19th century to fill jobs largely in the West, building railroads, mining and planting and picking crops. By the 1880s, however, unanimous against them was so high that Congress passed the first legislation restricting immigration. So the Chinese Exclusionary Act was what I was on to. And it goes on to say that in 1882, it barred entry of Chinese laborers for about 10 years, which later extended and made permanent in 1902 and made Chinese immigrants ineligible for U.S. citizenship, a prohibition that remained in effect until 1943. So in 1917, Congress passed restrictions on immigration from the so-called Asiatic barred zone, which included the Far East, the Philippines, at the time a U.S. territory, and the other Pacific islands. So not until about 1960s did Congress lift all the racial restrictions on immigration in 1965 and prohibit national origin discrimination in employment in 1964. So yet, despite the discriminations, Asians thrived. They now earn income above national average of whites and exceed whites in education levels, but race still affects their entry into America's elite. So it goes on to read that my Center for Equal Opportunity this week published a study looking at Asian acceptance rates at three elite universities. They named Harvard University, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and the California Institute of Technology. And the studies authored Dr. Althea Nagy looked at acceptance rates at three schools and found that two that use race and ethnicity as factors in admissions, Harvard and MIT, appear to cap Asian acceptance rates much as rates of acceptance for Jews were limited by elite schools in early eras. So as Nagy writes, a big name college degree, say Harvard or Princeton, signals that one has been approved to enter the American's elite class. Such degree signaling does not guarantee entry, but it is definitely a big help. But policies at elite schools that use race or ethnicity as a factor in admissions to increase diversity by gaining preference to certain minorities, mostly Blacks and Hispanics, work to the disadvantage of Asian students who already are overrepresented compared with their portion of the population. Thus, Asian Americans, who are only about 5.6% of the US population, make up larger shares of the students admitted to elite colleges. But despite the Affirmative action has always been sold on the for minorities who have faced discrimination, and in some instances, they still do. So there is no question that the pervasive state sponsored discrimination against Blacks has had a lasting legacy. You hear that? A lasting legacy. Discrimination against Hispanics was never as systematic as that against Blacks. But many Hispanics, especially new immigrants and their children, still encounter obstacles of social, economical, and educational achievement. But so traditionally have Asian Americans. And unlike the case with Blacks and Hispanics, their race appears to be a factor in explaining why they are currently not admitted to the elite class university commensurate with their academic achievements. Nagy shows that at both Harvard and MIT, Asian admissions seem to have hit a ceiling over the past 20 years or even declined. So at MIT, Asian admissions peaked in 1995 at 29% and have declined slightly since 26% in 2016. So it is lower. So at Harvard, admissions for Asians hit a high of 21% in 1993 and dropped and have remained nearly constant for at 17% since then. A suit against Harvard by Asian students alleging racial discrimination is set to be argued later this year. By contrast, Nagy analysis shows that Caltech, which does not use race as a factor in admissions, has seen a steady increase in the number of Asians admitted over the past 2 decades. In 2016, 43% of the students admitted to Caltech were Asians, but more importantly, the trend line since the late 1990s has been going up almost every year. Caltech has not applied a ceiling to Asian admissions, which is why it has more than twice the percentage of such students as Harvard, 65% more than MIT. As an interesting aside, Caltech manages to admit a large percentage of Hispanic students, 12%, even without using race or ethnicity as a plus factor. And so, isn't it time we could quit pretending using race in college admissions is morally acceptable because it helps some minorities? Asians have suffered enough discrimination over the years. They shouldn't face it now in the name of improving diversity. And so that is pretty much the whole crux of the article out of the New York Post. It's also in Yahoo, where it's also entitled Asians Are Among, and it goes into the same thing. It's basically the same thing. So it says the main victims of elite school affirmative action. So it goes in the whole spill. And so that's basically what this whole thing is about. I was trying to reload the video and talk about it because there is like a demographic that I did in previous videos of the USC enrollment. It's more like higher numbers of Asians, more higher number of whites than there is Latin and Black students. And then I guess the closest to in line with the highest of enrollment for whites to Asians would be like students that are like from foreign countries or something like it's, student abroad, should I say, if you will. But it just goes to show you that even schools, they compete and there are schools that use race as a factor. And then two, it's about the money, the enrollment of the students. And if that plays a part in there, then you get a higher number of students that will, come to your school. And I'm sure that's good for the funding of it, I would bet. And so race does play a factor in education as well, a whole lot. With that being said, like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for listening.